Hello and welcome to today's virtual Hinckley Forum. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is presented in partnership with the University of Utah's Political Science Department. We would like to thank our streaming sponsor, AARP Utah, for making our virtual forums this fall possible. And we'd also like to thank our media sponsor, KCPW, for recording and rebroadcasting our forums as part of the Hinckley Radio Hour. Today's forum is Judges on the Ballot, casting informed votes in retention elections. We are joined by panelist Kim Cordova, Executive Director with the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, Christine Durham, retired Chief Justice on the Utah Supreme Court, Gil Miller, Chairperson on the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission and Managing Partner at Rocky Mountain Advisory, Jennifer Yim, Executive Director of the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission, and our moderator, Ron Gordon, General Counsel with the Governor's Office. If you have questions for our panelists, please enter them into the YouTube chat. We will address questions once we have completed the moderated panel discussion. And with that, I will turn the time over to our moderator.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Hinckley Institute, for providing us this opportunity. We have an extraordinarily talented panel today that I'm really happy to be able to participate with them. In order to understand the work of JPEC that was created by statute to provide good information to voters when it comes to retention election of judges, we need to understand the judicial appointment process and the judicial retention process. So Kim, could we start with you and have you walk us through the appointment process for state court judges?
Yes, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Hinckley Institute and the rest of the panelists. So happy to participate in this forum today. And so the judicial nominating commissions are created by statute and by rule. And what they do is that the governor appoints 7 commissioners per district. Throughout the state of Utah, we have 8 districts in Utah. So there's a judicial nominating commission for each one, and there's also a judicial nominating commission for the Court of Appeals in the Utah Supreme Court. And so there are 7 members per commission. There may not be no more than 4 who are lawyers, and there may not be more than 4 who are from a specific political affiliation. When there is a vacancy for a judicial vacancy, then if there's not a judicial nominating commission already in existence, then we create those. So I send an email to the bar, and they have to send us 4 names for lawyers. And usually it's their bar commissioners. They open it up. There is an announcement from the Utah State Bar that says that there's an opening for, let's say, the 3rd District Nominating Commission. Then they get applications, and the bar commissioners at the Utah State Bar, who are elected lawyers, they choose which names to send to us, and they send us 4 names. The governor needs only to pick 2 from those names. And then he usually will choose 2 other lawyers, or he'll choose all 4 of those names that are sent to us from the Utah State Bar. The other 3 members are citizen members, community members, that again can apply on our boards and commissions website. And usually there is a good mix of political affiliations. And for instance, when we're taking the 3rd District Nominating Commission as an example, because the 3rd District Nominating Commission serves not only Salt Lake County, but Tooele and Park City, then we'd like to have participants who represent all 3 of those geographic areas. Diversity in terms of what they do for a living, the types of practice, geographic location, and ethnic diversity are considered, and we like to have a really good mix and to be very inclusive and representative of the district that is being represented. And so all of this is governed by statute and by rule, administrative rule. And so once there is a vacancy, then we contact the Judicial Nominating Commission or create one. And it's a 4-year appointment. They're all appointed by the governor. And so we all of the applications come to the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, my agency, and then we staff the nominating commissions. There are usually 2 meetings. The nominating commission has a first meeting where they have access to the applications and they go over all of them. The applications are all online, and they include their resume, their work history, their public service, their community service, and then also references. They have to have references of opposing counsel, references of judges that they've appeared in front of, and then they get to choose colleagues or coworkers for references. They can also have people write in or call in references on their behalf. We also have a judicial council representative, usually from that district. They are a non-voting member, but they do sit through with the commission through the meetings, and they have access to the applications. And so the first meeting consists of the commission going through the applications and determining who they want to interview. And then there is a second meeting where it's usually a full day of interviews, and sometimes they interview anywhere from 10 to 15. And then at the end of that day, they vote anonymously and they send 5 names to the governor. And then after the 5 names are sent to the governor, we have a 10-day public comment period where the public can comment and write in any thoughts or opinions they have about the 5 candidates. Also, the names are sent to the Utah Senate. Then myself, by position, the executive director for the Commission on Criminal Juvenile Justice, the director of the Sentencing Commission, and then general counsel, interview the 5 candidates before they move on to the governor. And then the governor sits with them for about 30 minutes per candidate before he makes his selection. So there is a lengthy process. It usually takes about 6 months. After the governor makes his selection to fill the judicial vacancy, then we send all of the information on the candidate to the Senate. And then the Senate has the Judicial Confirmation Committee, the Judiciary Confirmation Committee, and they have, I believe, 8 senators on that commission and on that committee, and they interview the candidate, the governor's selection for the judicial vacancy, and then they make a recommendation to the full Senate, and then that candidate goes in front of the full Senate, and the full Senate votes on for notice and consent. And then we hand them over to the administrative office of the courts, and then they become a judge whenever that they choose that date. And so it's a very lengthy process. Like I said, it usually takes about 6 months, and there are several steps in terms of vetting to make sure that the candidate has enough experience, that they have good demeanor, that they have demonstrated work ethic, that their references are good, that there's nothing in their we get their credit reports, we get their we ask their bar for any disciplinary issues that might have been reported on the candidate. So the vetting process and the steps that go through the appointment are very long, and they're very extensive.
Thank you, Kim. I know that the Constitution and statutes say that partisan politics are not supposed to be part of the appointment process. I want you to tell us, is that really possible? Is it really possible that an elected partisan official can make these appointments, and that these judicial nominating commissions that are appointed by an elected partisan official can do this without regard to partisan politics?
Absolutely. You know, I've sat in nearly every commission across the state, and I was also a commissioner before I came into this position. So I had about 3 years of being a commissioner, and then 3 years of sitting and staffing these commissions throughout the state. So as I added up, it's a lot. It's 6 years worth and about 30 plus judges in district court. Oh, I forgot to also mention do district court and juvenile court. So with the mixture of juvenile court judges and district court judges, and sitting across the state, and as you can imagine, the makeup and the composition of the commissioners are different in the 8th district to the 5th district to the 1st district to the 3rd. Utah is very unique, and every community has its unique characteristics, and they do not come into play. You know, the goal is to have the best judge, to have the best candidates, to have them be the best, have them be fit for office. And it's amazing what happens because everything kind of goes out the window. And sometimes it makes no difference. You don't know what their political affiliation are. You don't know what their political beliefs are. It's completely nonpartisan. And the goal is to have the best candidates to fill this judicial vacancy. And it's the same and consistent throughout the entire state.
Thank you. Let's turn to talking about the judicial retention process. Justice Durham, you've been through this process. Could you walk us through what it means to have these judicial retention elections?
Let me unmute. Thanks, Ron, for that question, and thanks to the Hinckley Institute for sponsoring this discussion. It's true, I sat on the Utah bench trial on appellate for almost 40 years, 39 actually. I think I might be the most retained judge in the history of the state of Utah. But the retention process that we have developed in Utah builds on the nonpartisan process that Kim has just described in terms of judicial selection. There are different terms for each level of court: 6 years for the trial court, 8 years for the Court of Appeals, 10 years for the Supreme Court. And I've actually forgotten this, at this exact moment, what the Justice Court judges have. But at the end, as the end of a judge's term approaches, judges, who I will mention, by the way, in Utah experience a very robust system of judicial training and education. We really focus on professionalism. But as terms come to their end, JPEC, the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission, is mandated to perform a review that will go to the voters. Now, this follows a midterm review that's not for the voters, but is actually a performance review that is the results of which are returned to the judges themselves, so that they can use them for any kind of self-improvement. If they're needing, if the reviews turn up areas where they've got weaknesses, they can look to the judicial training programs that they have. They can work with their presiding judges, their mentor judges, and the education department of the administrative office of the courts. So that's a very robust system designed to help the judges. And then at the end of the term, the results of the surveys that JPEC does, of the comments it amasses, and of the sort of records that the Judicial Council keeps on whether the judges are up to date on their caseloads, are up to date on their educational requirements, and are in fact doing well on the administrative side. So both administratively and substantively, we do as robust a job as any state in the country. And Kim has already mentioned this, but I really want to emphasize the degree to which Utah's system of performance evaluation is the gold standard nationally. I mean, I was around when it was developed. I was around when other states were working on it. Partly that's because of our nonpartisan selection process. We managed to eliminate many of the risks and problems that so many other states have to deal with.
Thank you. Jennifer, what would you add from your perspective about the outline of retention elections in the state of Utah?
Thanks, Ron. I think that I would just add a little bit more about the process as it affects voters. So every even numbered year at every general election, voters are asked to review a certain slate of judges who are local to their area, or in the case of appellate judges, who serve the entire state. In different parts of the state, that might be 15 or 20 judges on your ballot in any given year. And the question on the ballot is different than in many other races. It is an uncontested election, election. And so the question is simply, should this judge be allowed to serve another term of office? A simple yes or no. And the challenge in answering that question is it's very difficult for many people to know how they should vote. They don't find themselves in court very often. And so the information that JPEG provides is a real attempt to help voters find substantive, rigorous, evaluative information about the judges they find on their ballots.
Thank you. Gil, this sounds like an exhaustive system, maybe an exhausting system as well. Are there other models out there that other states use for judges retaining their positions in office?
Well, there are some states use a contested system where judges actually have to go out and campaign and raise funds, put up signage, etc. And so that's one notion. There's a lot of room in there for issues, I'll just say, that I don't think we experience here in Utah. Personally, I think we have enough issues with elections to not involve the judges as well. But there's that model. There's a model that's more, on the federal level, where you've got federal judges that are appointed for life or for very extended terms in a bankruptcy setting. So there is some other ways to look at some things, but I think the way Utah does it, which is similar to many states in the country, is a way that makes sense, at least to me, in terms of just an average voter thinking that it's the voters that are going to make an election for the judges or make a decision, and not necessarily have it be some contested situation where they're having to go and raise funds, which to me, a judge raising money is not the way to keep judges impartial in my mind.
Thank you. Justice Durham, you referred to this as the gold standard. What do you like about Utah's system in particular?
Well, one of the issues that Gil just raised, and that's the question of money in judicial elections. In seeking to select and retain an impartial, competent, and nonpartisan judiciary, we think our system has a lot of advantages. One of the problems with raising money is that money can be brought to bear in pretty difficult ways. Gil has been very kind, but over the last 10 years, we've seen an avalanche of huge sums of money coming in from politically oriented PACs and focused on state Supreme Courts, realizing that state Supreme Courts have a great deal of influence in their states in how the laws are interpreted and in the kinds of claims that they review. And that has led to incredible infighting and really the devolution of a number of state Supreme Courts. Wisconsin is an example. Texas in about 10 years ago was another example. West Virginia actually had a chief justice who was bankrolled by a mining company that had cases pending before the court. And after that particular justice joined the court, he actually sat on some of their cases. So it can devolve pretty quickly when you let money into judicial elections. The other advantage that I think we have is that over the years, and I have to tell you, we've been doing performance evaluation ever since I joined the court, but it used to be the Judicial Council that did it. And I think even though I thought we did a good job and we worked at it, we didn't have any funding for it. And I think people did not respect the results as much as they respect the results of a separate commission like the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission. I think the data is more trusted. And it's not just trusted, I hope, by the public, because we work very hard for the public to understand that if they want objective information about what judges do it, who the judges do, who the judges are who are running for election, and what the people who appear in their courts think of them and those who are consumers of their opinions. That means that I think the judges themselves have come to respect the system and to be appreciative of the work that JPEC contributes to judicial performance improvement and the collaboration that we have with the Education Department and the Judicial Council to help provide resources for judges who need them.
Thank you. Gil, you mentioned the participation of voters as something that you think is important. So tell us, why should voters care? Why should voters care about judicial retention elections? Why should they take the time to review the information and vote in these elections?
Well, one needs only to look at the headlines every day in this country to look at how justice is being, thought about by every citizen in a good way or a bad way. And, the fact is, the normal citizen can't do much about what police officer is hired by a local municipality or what have you. But a normal citizen can vote for judges, which is the other part of that justice system that is being discussed every day in the news. And so for people to sit back on their laurels and say, I just can't do a thing, is just not right. If you don't do anything, and you don't do anything in terms of trying to better understand which judges you can vote for and what their evaluations appear to be like, well, you're right. You won't affect justice at all. But if you do, and you can look at those sorts of things, that's important, important for every voter.
Thank you. Okay, Justice Durham, I need to ask the same question to you. Having been on a ballot, why is it important? Why should voters care about this?
Well, one of the things I hear, Ron, and I'm sure anybody who's had a conversation with potential voters in this arena, here's some people, and I even have people in my family who say, I don't know anything about all these judges. I'm not happy with life. Vote them all out. And I just my heart sinks when I hear that comment, because I know what it was like to be a new and young judge. I know what it was like to acquire the procedural and legal experience and education I got on the trial bench. I know what it was like to grapple with difficult and important issues throughout my appellate career, hoping that I, in fact, gain some knowledge, a depth of experience, perspective, and the opportunity to involve in my judicial work. And so when you're voting everybody out, you are opting to staff the judiciary with new and inexperienced judges rather than keeping experienced and trained judges who get good reviews. So there really isn't any point in voting for the judges if you don't have any information about the judges. You're simply relying on their names on the ballot or possibly some hearsay that you've heard in your community that may or may not be true. And of course, you may have seen something in the press too. And as someone who was covered by the press for so many years, I can assure people that they try very hard, and sometimes they get it very right, and sometimes they don't get it so right. And to be an informed voter means to get the objective information.
Thank you. Okay, Jennifer, if we have all this great information, how do the voters find it? How do they access this information that will help them make good decisions?
There are actually a number of ways that people can find our information, but I would, as a starting point, recommend that people go to judges.utah.gov. That is JPEC's website. They can click on Know Your Judges and find all the information available about a judge, the results of their evaluation, the actual question scores that a judge receives in those evaluations. So there's as much or as little information that voters want to go to find to help them be informed voters.
Thank you. Kim, I've noticed that there are 59 judges who are subject to retention on this year's Ballot, and I've noticed that they've all received favorable recommendations from JPEC. What does that mean?
So thank you, Ron. And so what that means is that they, when they receive a favorable recommendations, is that that they pass their minimum performance standards. And again, this is outlined in statute. And so when they do meet their minimum performance standards, then the commissioners are legally required to vote in favor of retention, but there is a rebuttable presumption. Judges get to see their reports and the vote totals before deciding whether they want to run for the retention election. But most often judges with the negative evaluation resign. And so when I think that's a misconception I think that a lot of people have and the public has, is that the recommendations aren't necessarily meaningful because there's usually a favorable recommendation. However, there's so much going on behind, there's so much work that's going on to get those recommendations out that that usually the public is not seeing that. And I also just want to follow up on something that Justin Durham said in the previous on the previous question. She brought up something about the press, that sometimes voters won't recognize a name. Like I get the same thing too. People will text me and be like, what judge should I vote for? Right? Or they'll not vote for a judge because there's been negative press. And we have been working really diligently to educate our press and to really be better partners to them so that they have more education in terms of what they're actually printing and putting out to the public, and to really understand the scenario in which a judge made a decision, right? Because they have to follow the law. And so when there is a sentence or there is a judgment, the judge is really following the law, right? Which is what they're supposed to do. And so that is really meaningful to be able to have really an independent evaluation from the judges, the people who appear before them, and colleagues and things like that, to get a very independent review of the judge's performance.
Thank you. The commission doesn't look at every specific ruling of judges in these evaluations. So Jennifer, what kinds of things is JPEC considering when they're evaluating judges and making recommendations to voters?
That's a great question, Ron. It's true. We don't look at judges' individual rulings. We think it's very important. We follow best practices in judicial performance evaluation, and we are less interested in intervening in making this evaluations of how a judge rules, as much as assuring the public and the process that judges have the skills that they need to be good judges. So do they have the legal skills required to do the job? Do they have the administrative skills, the communication skills? How do they treat people who come into court? Are they keeping up on their education? And what is the experience like to be in that judge's courtroom? We're very interested in issues like that and evaluating those for the public so that they can estimate whether or not the judge has those professional and academic and legal skills to do the job.
Thank you. Justice Durham, what would you add?
Well, I just wanted to add to Jennifer's comment that there's been some interesting data about the things that tend to pressure judges. And in states where judicial retention is accomplished by elections, and often contested elections included, one study demonstrated that judges running for office, trial judges running for office in states with those contested elections, generally speaking, they studied their sentencing practices, and they discovered that their sentencing practices actually changed in the run-up to the election when they were under scrutiny. And the sentences they started handing down in those periods of time were more severe than their average sentencing during the times when they weren't running for election. And what that data suggests is that the selection of judges process, if it's not protected, can in fact result in completely eviscerating, hollowing out the judicial function. The judicial function is to follow the law and to act in a neutral and impartial manner. And if judges are afraid that they have to rule in certain ways to keep their jobs, it apparently has an influence on them. And that's something we try to avoid here in Utah. And I think we do a pretty good job. Judges know they're not going to be judged on the basis of even one or two opinions, although we've certainly seen instances in our history where a case or an opinion that's gotten a very high public profile can affect a judge's retention election. But that in Utah is extremely rare as opposed to states which don't have a system like ours.
Thank you. Gil, so we have these 59 judges who will be on the ballot, and they've all received favorable recommendations. We've heard a little bit about what that means. Kim has explained to us. What would you add to that? What should the voters take from the favorable recommendation? Does it mean that all these judges are performing equally well, equally qualified? Explain that to us a little bit.
Well, a couple things. One thing to reiterate is that these judges see JPEC's report prior to it going public. And so when JPEC has some criticisms or some suggestions as to what the judge should be doing differently, if it's serious enough, that judge has an opportunity to look at that report before he even decides to run for re-election, for retention. And so people forget that or don't know it, that we really serve a purpose prior to the election and prior to the judges coming in for retention. To say that all 59 are equal would be a misnomer. That can be developed just by looking at we do a 1-paragraph summary of the judge. We do it a lot more. And if people want to dig into judges.utah.gov, they can see the full-blown report that we have analyzed and talked about. But just in 1 paragraph, you can see the differences between the judges in terms of what their colleagues think about them, what other people that have evaluated them think of them. It's pretty easy to see the distinction between the judges because they're not all the same, but they all have passed those minimums.
Thank you. Jennifer, a lot of our viewers want to know what, if anything, JPEC does in its evaluations to ensure that the justice system is fair, the judicial system is fair, and does JPEC ever look at issues of systemic racism or things like that?
This is the issue of the summer, isn't it? We as a community have been very concerned about about the fairness of our justice system. It's an ongoing issue, and JPEC, unlike the rest of the justice system, probably doesn't have all of the answers. But we have, as a commission, taken issues of bias and implicit bias, particularly, seriously. We have decided as a commission that when we review judges, we are going to do so blind. We, as a staff, we hide all of the information that is identifying information about the judges when we review their evaluations, so that the commissioners who you see here today don't actually know who they're reviewing. We hide all of the gender, any race information, geographic information, and we train our commissioners on implicit bias so that we can create a process that minimizes the impact of implicit bias in order to end up with an evaluation process that can treat judges fairly. We educate the lawyers who evaluate judges. We educate our courtroom observers who go into across this state about implicit bias, and we've worked very hard to try to minimize the impact of implicit bias in our deliberative process.
Thank you. Justice Durham, we've had some viewers ask whether upon being retained once, a judge then serves a life term on the bench. And so you've indicated that you may very well be the most retained judge in the state of Utah. Would you explain that to us? What happens after a judge has been retained once?
When a judge has been retained, it's for a specific term. So 6 years on all of the courts except the Supreme Court, which is 10. And I misspoke earlier. I thought the Court of Appeals, I'll have to check my history because I was sure they were 8, but they're apparently 6, like the trial courts. So you get a 6-year term if you're on a trial court, or the Court of Appeals, you get a 10-year term if you're on the Supreme Court, but then you will be up for a midterm review, just as you were the first time, and a term end retention election. So, and that actually is a really wise system. There are other ways to remove judges who are slipping. There's the Judicial Conduct Commission that looks at disability or violations of the canons of judicial conduct, the rules for judicial conduct. But the midterm reviews and the repeated retention elections ensure that a judge stays at a high performance level and continues to function appropriately. So no, we do not have life terms in the state of Utah anywhere in the judiciary. And I also wanted to build on Jennifer's comments about racial and ethnic bias. As we all know, the systemic nature of those problems it's deeply embedded, and it's frankly just beginning to dawn on a lot of people. But the judiciary has had a pretty robust education program, and the Administrative Office of the Courts is for the first time acquiring funding and sponsoring a diversity and inclusion officer within the judiciary who will be responsible for working on those issues inside the judicial branch. And, you know, you have to say better late than never, but of course, that's what we're saying about society in general.
Thank you. We've heard a couple of references to the midterm evaluation. Gil, can you tell us a little bit more about what the midterm evaluation is? And then Justice Durham, I'm interested in your thoughts on how a judge might actually use the midterm evaluation.
So a midterm evaluation, for instance, on those judges that are serving 6-year terms, about midterm, they receive a valuation from JPEC very similar to the one they receive at their retention time. The difference is that midterm is for their benefit only. It's for them to use internally and try to perhaps, you know, if there's some critiques in there, they might want to be able to change something for the remaining half of their term so that by the time their retention election hits, perhaps some of those things that the survey people that have taken surveys have been critical on, perhaps they can work through them. And I think on my term, you know, on JPEC, I've seen judges that take those midterms very seriously and really do change the way they're behaving if necessary, so that by the time the retention election hits, they're a different judge, in my opinion.
Thank you. Justice Durham?
Yes, I would add that, you know, when you look at the kinds of things that are studied, and Gil has made it clear that they see the same arenas explored in midterm elections as they do in retention evaluations. And, you know, so they're looking at demeanor, they're looking at knowledge of the law, they're looking at administrative and management skills, how a trial judge, for example, runs his or her courtroom and does scheduling. And they're looking at taking advantage of educational opportunities. And the things that judges can do, for example, if there are demeanor problems, if a number of people complain about the way the judge speaks to litigants or expresses engagement or not with litigants, one of the resources that the judge then has is to go to his or her presiding judge, which each district has. That's the leadership judge in a district. And to work with that judge, possibly to be referred to a mentor, possibly to be referred to continuing education, possibly be referred to some reading. And if the presiding judge doesn't have the resources, the presiding judge can go to the education department or to the judicial council and say, my judges need more help in this arena. And that's true, actually. I mentioned demeanor, but that process is really available for any area in which a judge appears not to be keeping up with his or her peers. And actually, that's something I would also mention, is that judges not only get their own individual scores, they get, as do voters in the voter information that we have available on the website, you see how that individual judge is performing vis-a-vis his or her peers. So it's not just that somebody got X number of negative comments or positive comments, it's that X judge got what was a certain percentage above or below or at the level that his or her peers are performing.
Thank you. Kim, I want to come back to you. You have an interesting perspective. You are involved in the application process, the appointment process. You're a member of JPEG. So first, if you would take just a minute and tell us some of the things that the members of judicial nominating commissions look for when they're deciding who they're going to eventually nominate to the governor.
Thank you, Ron. So they look for, and this is emphasized, and again, we remember that we have a judicial council representative who is a sitting judge. So the Judicial Council, and Justice Sturman can fill us in a little bit more on what that is, but it's judges who are taking leadership roles, you know, across the state who sit on this council. And so they nominate a Judicial Council representative to sit. And so the commissioners are getting guidance about what a judge does and what a judge needs. And normally the three categories, and we also invite the presiding judge to come and talk to our commissioners at the first meeting, and to help give guidance and to help give recommendations as to what they should look for. And I usually divide them in three categories. It's demeanor, right? They want the judge to be kind and respectful to the parties that come before him, but also to their colleagues. And they also like to have work ethic, right? Because being a district court judge, appellate judge, a justice of the Supreme Court, a juvenile court judge, there are heavy caseloads. It is not an easy job. And so the days of the representation of that's where somebody goes at the end of their career as their pre-retirement is false. I mean, that's just completely inaccurate. It's long hours, it's heavy caseloads, it's lots of involvement in terms of access to justice and building up different areas that the judiciary and the courts can be accessible, transparent, and inclusive to the communities that they serve. And so work ethic, demonstrated work ethic, and smarts, right? Talent, skill level. You know, many people also don't know that when you go into the law, we specialize like doctors, right? We don't know everything about everything. Some people are general practitioners, but many lawyers have specialties, and so they build a career in a specific area of the law. And so it's important to have trial experience, to be in the courtroom, to be able to have a good grasp of procedure and of evidentiary rules. And sometimes that takes time, and sometimes that's just, you know, talent. And so all of those things are looked at and weighed on, and looking at who else is on the bench and things that they've done in their communities, anything that they can distinguish them from their colleagues that they are within the pool of applicants. You know, the goal is, I think, for everybody is to make sure that we get the best judges that we possibly can based on merit into these judicial vacancies and sitting on the bench. And so that is something that the commissions take incredibly serious.
Thank you. And Kim, as you see the judges go through the appointment process, confirmation process, and then into this evaluation process, just tell me your thoughts about the benefit to the judges. We've talked a lot about the benefit to the voters. What might be the benefit to the judge, in your opinion, of Utah's evaluation system?
So, and we get a lot of questions about this, right? About our nominees and the candidates that are put forward and that are selected. We wish we had a crystal ball, right? Our system is good, right? Our system is one of the best systems in terms of appointments across the country, with, the amount of time and the amount of vetting and the amount of eyes that kind of go into this evaluative process to make sure that we have the best and the brightest appointed to the bench. We don't have a crystal ball, and we wish that we did. And so what the evaluations do is it allows the judge to adjust if needed, to be able to get feedback. Many times, they are in their court and they have their court clerk and they have their bailiff. And sometimes, especially in the smaller jurisdictions, they don't really have access to like one-on-one or instant feedback about how they're doing or what's happening. And so what this evaluation process does is it gives them feedback. It gives them a chance to readjust. How am I doing? What am I doing? What do I need to do better? What are my challenges? What are my strengths? What do I need to focus on? And so it really allows them, because really the judges want to be their best too. And so if they need to look for mentorship, or if they need more colleague support, or if they need more education and training in a certain area, then they are able to readjust and have the flexibility to get feedback that we all want in our professional lives, so that we can be better and do better and be the best that we can.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Some of our viewers are asking about whether judges have ever not been retained during an election. And I know that there have been at least 2 judges that were not retained. That happened before the creation of Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission. Jennifer, we've talked a little bit about why it is that we might not see that happen more frequently. Would you just comment a little bit more on that? Why is it that more judges we don't see that happen more often, judges failing to be retained? What contributes to that?
Well, the election process is the retention election process is the last step in, I think, what we've talked about here today, is a sort of a long process of performance improvement and accountability for judges. So there's this, as we started, this rigorous, I've heard it called life-shortening, selection process for judges that's based on merit rather than partisan consideration. And it takes a long time. And hopefully, I think that the record shows, creates a strong judiciary for the state of Utah. So you take these above average folks and then you subject them to a term-long evaluation process, where they get a midterm evaluation that points out the potential problems of their work and gives them an opportunity to improve. That, if they take that process seriously, and many judges do, they remediate those problems before it comes to the retention election. Judges don't always, but tend to get favorable recommendations for retention from JPEC because they pass minimum performance standards. And then we have said that those who don't are most likely to resign or retire rather than stand for a retention election with a negative evaluation from JPEC. All of that happens before the ballots show up in your mailbox or at your ballot box. And we ask you then to take an active role in learning about the judges on your ballot. But it is true that by the time we're done with that 6 or 10-year process, most judges are performing very well, and the voters have that voice at the end of that process. And as a consequence, most judges are retained.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Ron, can I
Justice
just
Stern.
add a footnote?
yes,
I
please.
think it's important
Please do.
for people not to realize that not every judge who was up for retention and then resigns did so because he or she didn't meet minimum performance standards. So it is the case that there's a long history of that happening, and people who see that, you know, they've got problems or maybe there are health issues. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why people resign, and certainly not having to fight a retention battle against a negative recommendation would be one. But I wouldn't want people to assume that anybody who has resigned before retention was in that category. We try to protect people's privacy.
Thank you, Justice Durham. I have another question for you, Justice Durham. I wonder if you could help us understand what the learning curve is like for becoming a judge. You've served both at the trial court level and at the Supreme Court level. What's it like learning to become a judge?
Well, it's interesting because I joined the trial bench in 1978, and this was before we had any judicial education. I mean, they basically dropped me in a courtroom, handed me a robe, assigned a clerk, and some case files, and told me to go be a judge, which was why I became so passionate over the years about helping to build judicial education and training as part of the professional experience. And now our judges get assigned mentors. They get early education opportunities. They get a strong presiding judge, which is also a relatively new phenomenon in our system, who will look after them and make sure they're staying up to speed. Mostly the thing you need is the opportunity to talk to, observe more experienced judges and to get your questions answered, because it's a completely different profession. It's not like practicing law, not just in your neutral orientation rather than your client connected orientation, but just in the work that you do, the way in which you have to manage trials, manage juries, deal with juror instructions. The list is endless of the brand new things that a new judge is going to have to do. In some respects, well, even the appellate courts are also brand new, because there you have to work essentially in a committee system where you don't get to be king or queen of the hill. You have to get a certain number of votes or your opinions will never see the light of day. So you've got to be able to negotiate as well as hone your research skills. You have to learn how to manage staff, your court clerks. The list is very long, which is why I made the earlier comment about how foolish it is to think about throwing judges out for no reason, because they've had a lot invested in their learning curve. And I would say the learning curve is very, very steep. I'm trying to think of an analogy that people would think of. So maybe going from, I don't know, managing a grocery store to becoming a university professor, or if you could just think of something that would be such a foreign environment with lots of new skills, that would be a good description.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Gil, I want to ask you, do judges improve over time? Does the commission see differences ever from looking at a midterm to looking at the retention evaluation? Is there reason to believe that judges are considering this information and taking it into account in their own performance?
They absolutely, I've seen the numeric results suggest they do improve or can improve between their midterm and the retention election. Those that take it seriously, and I really think our judges do, can look at that midterm and make marked improvements over the course of the next 3 years. And even though we're looking at minimum retention standards, occasionally JPEC is still trying to look at how they're doing in relationship to their other peers. And sometimes when they're on the lower end of how they're doing with their peers, it's helpful to look back and see, well, how was the surveys and the results 3 years ago? Have they made some progress? And it gives us comfort in what we are trying to educate the judge about in his retention election, to be able to say, you know what, you've made some good progress. Or on the other hand, to be able to tell a judge, you know what, you've made no progress in terms of your midterm election. So that concerns us in terms of you're taking the process seriously or not.
Thank you. Some of our viewers are wondering why it is that JPEC does not look at individual judicial decisions. Kim, what can you tell us about that?
Thank you, Ron. And so, you know, we have our system is built in for legal review, right? That's why we have the Court of Appeals, and that's why we have the Utah Supreme Court. Also, when you talk about justice courts, so there's really 4 kind of steps, right? There's the justice courts, who can do a de novo appeal, which means a brand new, like a brand new case into the district court. And then you have the district court and the juvenile courts who have their review as the Court of Appeals. And then you have the Utah Supreme Court. And so there's layered in already the system that we have built, a process in which legal decisions can be reviewed, procedural decisions, legal decisions can be reviewed. And so that is why also I think it would just be, it's incredibly, depending on which district you're in, time consuming in terms of what each sentence is. And so, you know, we really try to keep, the courts really try to keep good data on that. And we try to have a good understanding of what's happening in terms of trends, and what is happening in terms of sentencing decisions. But if it's a legal issue and it's a legal review, then we have a built-in system of the Court of Appeals to be able to look at, which where you have then a panel of judges who that's what they do is they are able to follow. They look at the law, they look at what is happening, and then they do a review of the legal decision. Just another question that came up in the chat is that yes, judges have to live in the district in which they sit.
Thank you. We have just a short period of time. Jennifer, one of the things that I wanted to ask you, you had talked about implicit bias. And this is an area where Utah has really been leading the nation. So in a minute or less, Jennifer, tell us about all the amazing work that Utah is doing when it comes to implicit bias, particularly as it applies to our judiciary.
Well, I think that what's interesting about this is the energy and the enthusiasm for training and for really looking critically at processes to make sure that we're not just talking when it comes to bias about individual decisions, but it's about the process, the systems that we have in place, and that they are as fair as they can be to all of the people who are served by them. So JPEC, for example, has worked to look at those deliberative processes to see if we can unpack what kinds of elements need to be in place to help constrain implicit bias from making a decision and creating a process that can be as fair to people as possible. And I think we've seen that in multiple places throughout the judiciary and through our justice system. So it's an exciting time, I think, to be involved in the justice system. There are lots of people who are trying to urge our government to be better about these issues. But from where I sit, it's great to see that enthusiasm and that active work to try to meet these concerns about implicit bias.
Thank you. Gil, tell us again, please, where voters can go to get information about, there you go.
There I am, right there. We paid a lot of money for this signage. But you know what? Literally, Ron, in 10 seconds, I went onto that website with my handheld device. I typed in my county name, and up came all the judges that will be on my ballot. And with one more click, I found out a lot more about those judges. This is an easy process that you can do even the moment you're walking in to vote or doing it by mail.
Thank you. Justice Durham, Jennifer, Kim, Gil, thank you for your participation. Thank you to the Hinckley Institute, and thank you to everybody who has joined us today. Don't forget to vote.